If you would, turn to Matthew 16. Matthew chapter 16. Typically, I start working on a lesson on Monday, and by Saturday, I'm fairly comfortable with where we are for Sunday. This time I started Monday a week ago, and have changed my mind several times. But there's just a lot of neat stuff in this passage. It's a very famous passage. It's one that has been kind of used and misused, interpreted and reinterpreted down through the years. So I want us to take some time to look at some of the little details as we go through to the main thrust of the teaching. I want us to envision the world's most important business meeting. If you've sat in on some business meetings, there are some that you knew were extremely important, and there were some that were just taking up time. Have you ever had somebody tell you, we're going to have a stand-up meeting, and then 3 hours later you're still standing there and you're really not sure what it was that you came for in the first place? This one's important. This is at a turning point in Jesus' ministry. It's at a time when he needs for his disciples to really understand what's going on in their ministry and what's going to go on in the disciples' ministry after he's gone. Now, this meeting doesn't take place in a New York high-rise. It takes place kind of outdoors in the general vicinity of a place called Caesarea Philippi. Now, there are lots of Caesareas in the New Testament, and there's more than one Philippi in the New Testament. Those guys like to curry favor with the people who were in charge, with the rulers of their day, and so they would name stuff after them. Caesarea Philippi was actually named after the Caesar, obviously, that's the Caesarea part, but it was named that by one of the sons of Herod the Great, whose name happened to be Philip. So instead of saying, well, just Caesarea, it was the city of Caesar dedicated by Philip, so it was Caesarea Philippi. There was a particular thing at Caesarea Philippi that plays kind of loosely into the things that Jesus has to say, so I want you to be aware of it. There was a very deep cave at Caesarea Philippi, and the people had for a long time believed that that was the dwelling place of the god Pan. Now, Pan is a god of the underworld, but he's also a god that is in charge of bringing on the spring, bringing on new life, those sorts of things. And so they would do all kinds of debaucherous things outside the mouth of this cave. And they believed that if you went into that cave and went deeply enough, that you would end up in Hades. So there was this aura about the place at Caesarea Philippi. Folks would travel from long distances to come and to worship at the temple of Pan and the cave that went down to Hades. So hang on to that thought as we go on through. So Jesus has this business meeting right in the very near vicinity of a pagan temple dedicated to the god of the underworld. Now let's take a look at the question that Jesus asked his disciples. Let's start reading in Matthew 16, verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. This was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So item number one on the agenda of this amazing business meeting is a consumer sampling. How are we doing in the public? What do people think about us? Have you heard anybody saying anything about who they think that I, the Son of Man, am. The disciples often acted as kind of a buffer zone around Jesus. And so as people were coming to Jesus, they would field the questions first. If they could heal the person, they might heal the person. So not every person that came to be with Jesus actually made it to Jesus. Sometimes the apostles were taking care of them in advance. So they actually knew the people on a physical level anyway, probably better than Jesus did. There were probably folks that had come in more than one occasion and tried to get into that inner circle, and they'd had discussions with these people. They knew them a little bit more intimately, again, at least in the physical realm, than Jesus did. And so it's a legitimate question. What do people think that I'm here for? Who do people think that I, the Son of Man, am? Why does he use the phrase, Son of Man? Why does he describe himself that way? Before we ever get to what the other folks think, why does Jesus use the phrase Son of Man? Well, it's a messianic term that has a dual meaning. In Daniel, when he's having all these visits from angels, and again in Ezekiel when he's having visits from angels, the angels would call them Son of Man. So Daniel has the title Son of Man, Ezekiel has the title Son of Man when angels are addressing them. So it might be like you run into somebody from Oklahoma and you say, "How you doing, Okie?" All right, it's just a little tagline. We know that I'm me and you're you, and we're not exactly the same because you're from above that borderline, right? So how you doing, Okie? How are you, Son of Man? An angel would address a human as a son of man because the son of a man is a man, right? A human being. So in one sense, the term Son of Man just means that you're human. But let me read you a little bit from Daniel chapter 7. He says, "I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples and nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting kingdom, and it will never pass away." Right? So you have some people, in fact all the multitudes that perhaps he was wanting to know what they thought, they're all sons of men. But then there's the Son of Man. When Daniel gives this description, of course, he saw it in a night vision. He didn't really understand all about it that we understand. We know exactly who he's talking about, the one whose dominion is everlasting and whose kingdom will never pass away. So the question is this: who do the regular run-of-the-mill sons of men think that I, the one-of-a-kind Messiah, Son of Man, am? And it gets all kinds of wonderful answers. Some people think you're John the Baptist. Some people think you're Elijah. Some people think you're Jeremiah or maybe one of the other prophets. Why did they come up with all of these weird and wonderful explanations of who Jesus might be? It's all about the miracles. Right? When Jesus comes on the scene, he's doing things and he's teaching things that were above and beyond anything they had ever seen. So they had to come up with an explanation. King Herod killed John the Baptist, and then he finds out about Jesus' ministry, and he says, well, that's John the Baptist come back from the dead. That's why he could do all those miracles. Elijah had great power in his ministry. Maybe that's why Jesus has great power. Maybe he's Elijah come back. Jesus prophesied about the destruction of Jerusalem, as did Jeremiah. So maybe it's Jeremiah who's come back once again. They had all kinds of explanations as to who this Son of Man might be. But then Jesus asked the inner circle. Right? Once you find out what everybody else thinks, you're not going to get very far promoting a product. You're not going to get very far explaining your mission if the inner circle doesn't get it. If they don't understand who you are, if they don't understand what the mission is, then you're not going to get very far very fast. So he says, okay, so some people think I'm Elijah, some people think I'm John the Baptist, but who do you guys think that I am? And Peter immediately answers. There's no hesitation, right? The inner circle knows. The inner circle has this information They've already figured out what's going on. Some from the miracles, some from the teaching, some from insider information that Jesus has shared with them. They know who Jesus is. It just so happens that Peter is the first one to speak. Peter's usually the first one to get to speak. When I was in the 5th and 6th grade, we had a wonderful couple of teachers. There was Elizabeth Sowell and Suzanne Birch. Our daughter's name is Elizabeth Suzanne, so you do the math. Elizabeth Sowell and Suzanne Birch. Also had a very close friend at that time named Valerie Howard, now Valerie Killingsworth. And Valerie and I always wanted to be the first ones. Right? So when we were having Bible quiz or we were looking up passages in the Bible or whatever, it was a direct competition between Valerie and I. We were going to beat the other one no matter what it took. I've often wondered who was the other guy that Peter was always trying to outdo, right? James or John or one of those guys that also, they knew the answer. The group as a whole understood this concept. Peter immediately answers, and it said, "You are the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God." Now, some translations will use the term Christ. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. The Greek word Christos means the same thing as the Hebrew word Messiah. It's the idea of the anointed one, the one who is the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the one who is large and in charge, the one that God has brought to be over his kingdom, the one that's the fulfillment to that prophecy that Daniel gave. His kingdom will come and it will never, ever pass away. So we know who you are. You're the anointed one. You're the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. In response to that, Jesus gives projections on what's going to happen inside their group, right? We've heard from the outsiders. We've done a sampling of what the consumers think. They don't really understand. They're stabbing at it, trying to figure us out. What do the insiders know? Well, the insiders know the mission. We are following Messiah. We're going to be preaching the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus then says, well, okay, let me tell you what's going to happen with this kingdom. Right? And his statements are not statements of hesitation. They're not statements of what if. They're statements of prophecy and statements of absolute. This is exactly what's going to happen in the coming months and years. Right? Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. This was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. I tell you, you're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Where are they again? They're in Caesarea Philippi. They're just down the street from the temple of Pan, where the big cave is, and if you go far enough down the cave, you get to Hades, and so Jesus uses it as a visual aid. It's like he's got a PowerPoint going on. He's just like, look over there, you see that, and everybody believes if you go far enough, you go down to Hades. Hades, the place of death. In Hebrew, it was Sheol, the place of the departed ones, down to death. Death will not be able to stop what we're doing. Now, there could be a plethora of explanations. Let me give you two. He could have just been talking about himself. Right? The gates of death will not be able to stop me. He's going to die. He's going to be in the grave 3 days. He's going to come back. They couldn't bar him in. They couldn't wall him in. They couldn't stop his progression. He went to Hades, and then he came back. The first one to be born from the dead, never to die again. Right? So maybe he's talking about himself, or maybe in a broader sense, he's talking about the fact that those who are in him, those who are part of this kingdom, that Hades will have no jurisdiction over them. That they will die, as all regular sons of men die, and they will go into the Hadean realm, but at the shout, at the sound of the trumpet, when all of the dead are raised, that those in the kingdom, death has no jurisdiction over them. So he could be just talking about himself. He could be talking about his kingdom in general. And he could be talking about the absolute end of all things. At some point, death will be completely overcome. Right? The last enemy to be destroyed is death. It's from 1 Corinthians 15. But then he goes on to talk about locking and unlocking. I will give you the keys to the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Now remember who he's talking to. Right? Peter's an impetuous guy. Right? He always wants to be first in line. He always wants to be the one answering the question. He's the one that tells Jesus the night before his death, it doesn't matter what happens, I'll never deny you, I'll never leave you. Right? Jesus has to respond, well, before the cock crows, you'll deny me 3 times. So Peter is always in, he's always ready, his hand's always in the air. Peter wants to be that guy. But think about who Peter is. When Jesus called Peter to be his follower, where was Peter? He was a fisherman. He worked on a boat all day, sometimes all night. He would be throwing a net into the sea, pulling it out, and going through whatever got caught in the net to find out if there was anything sellable. Right? He had partners, James and John. Probably worked for James and John's daddy, right, Mr. Zebedee. Everybody working together, just fishing. It was an everyday, very blue-collar kind of existence. And now, he's just said, we know who you are, you're the Messiah. And the Messiah says, well, guess what? You are going to get to be involved in unlocking all of this stuff for the world. Right? You're not just a fisherman anymore. You're not just a guy with his nets anymore. You're a guy that's going to be remembered throughout history as one who unlocked the kingdom of heaven, over which death has no jurisdiction. And in a world where we're so surrounded by death, it's good to know that death has no jurisdiction. Right? The kingdom of heaven is stronger than the gates of Hades. And Peter, I want you to be part of announcing that to the planet. I mean, what a promotion to be Peter on that day and to be told you're going to have that kind of a role in the furtherance of the kingdom of God. Now next week, Lord willing, I want us to dig that out a little bit more. I want us to talk about some of the ways in which God used Peter to let other people know about the message of the kingdom. But I want to let that rest for a minute and just look at that last verse, verse 20. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. His disciples had given him a rundown on what people thought. And Jesus basically says, let them think it. Right? Some think you're Elijah. Okay. Some think you're John the Baptist. That's fine. Some think you're Jeremiah. Leave it alone. Don't tell them what you know. It's not time for everybody to know that I am the Son of Man. It's not time for everybody to know that I'm the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's not time for everybody to know everything that you know. So keep this information to yourself. Now ask yourself, how big a secret can you keep? Right? We know who you are. You're the Messiah. You are the Son of God. Okay, don't tell anybody. Don't share that little bit of information. Now in our neighborhood, if you ask people for a description, who do you think Jesus is? There's a bunch of them that would come up with exactly that description. Well, that's the Son of God. They know that. In Peter's neighborhood, no. There was about 12 guys that knew what was going on. And they had to sit on that information for another several months before it was time for them to share the message with the people around them. So Peter, congratulations, you've been given a great promotion, but you can't use it yet. You have to wait. And when it's time, you'll know it's time. And then you can tell people about this amazing kingdom. And you can tell people that I'm the Messiah. And you can tell people all the things you've been guarding up in your heart during my ministry. But for now, hang on to it. It's not quite time yet. So again, Lord willing, next week we'll talk about some of the things that Peter got to do after Jesus was gone back to the Father. So we're going to skip over a few months and just get to some of the neat things that Peter got to do, and then we'll come back to the text. Let's have a prayer together. Father, thank you for letting us know who you are. Thank you for making yourself known to us in Jesus. Thank you for his apostles. Thank you for Peter, for his willingness and his desire to be used in your kingdom. Father, help us to have that kind of desire, to always want to be the first one in, to always want to be part of telling people about your greatness. And Father, thank you for letting us live in a time when so many people call on your name. Help us to help them and encourage them to stay faithful to you, to stay faithful to your word. And Father, help us as we try to be your people in this place. It's in Jesus that we pray. Amen. If you need to respond to the invitation,